as the data subcommittee, the Fearless Data Subcommittee. And Barb is going to give a short update on what we discussed and what we thought about. And then we're going to open it up to discussion from anyone else for ideas.
Thank you, Chief Justice. So at our meeting, first of all, I think Emily sent out the data worksheet to everyone a couple of different times, and they did a great job, putting together the spreadsheet and each of the bills that we're looking at and what impact and the questions around the impact. So, but in our discussion, what we talked about was that the quantitative data is good, but we also need to go beyond that a little bit and look at some of the additional qualitative data. So for instance, if you have, and Emily, I don't know if you're sharing the data worksheet.
Yep, I can. Hold on one.
Sorry, and Melissa, if I put words in your mouth, feel free to jump in, because you said it much more eloquently than I just did. So Emily, if you can scroll down to the part, the non-jail and probation. So what we looked at here was the idea that these things are good, but we also need to look at things like what impact did it have on probation caseloads. We've heard some sort of anecdotal stories that, district courts that had probation caseloads of like 1,500 are now down to 500. And so what does that mean for those individuals? And we don't want this to be a punitive thing. We don't want to say we're taking probation officers away, but how can we maybe redeploy those resources and focus them on some other areas where we're seeing emerging needs? So that's why we need to see, what is the impact on the probation caseloads? And also, what are the reasons maybe that the judges are citing if they're overcoming that rebuttable presumption? So why are they putting people on continuing to put people on probation? Because once we have those reasons, we can look and see if there's a trend and see if we need to, go back and do some kind of legislative fix to include those individuals. And then lastly, in this particular area, we also talked about the idea of the pre-sentence investigations. If someone is being charged with an offense that's a non-jail, non-probation sentence, are they still being ordered for a pre-sentence investigation? Because many of the courts also charge for that. So we kind of need to look at that. And Takura, I don't know if you're seeing anything in your practice that maybe you can shed some light on that particular issue in the future. And then for the length of probation, the next one down, basically the same thing. Again, what impact is this shortened length of probation having on probation, caseloads? If people were staying on probation, for sometimes 5 years, and now it's going down to 3 years, I would assume that that has a pretty significant effect on probation caseloads. The early discharge, early probation discharge eligibility. Again, here we think it might be important to collect the reasons for the denial of an early discharge. So if someone is not, being discharged early, we'd like to know the reasons for that. We have heard from the treatment courts that this was a big concern. And so if we see the only people that are being denied early discharge are those in the treatment courts because they haven't completed their, rehabilitative program yet, then that's fine, that makes sense. But if we see reasons for denial of early discharge sort of all over the map, then we might need to, get in there and investigate that a little bit more. And I think that was the biggest bulk of our discussion. Again, collecting not only the quantitative data, but also, the qualitative. And Melissa, I don't know if you want to throw anything into that.
Thanks, Barbara. I think you said it pretty well. We did talk about, since I'm not as much of an expert on some of the specific data that are in this list, how we might just accompany the report, which could get pretty dense and filled with a lot of numbers, with also some stories and some sort of quantitative illustrations of, or qualitative illustrations of the kinds of things we're seeing. So as Barb says, what does it mean for the caseloads to drop, to be able to just have a short summary of a story of a particular area that is seeing this and what they're doing, and that's just as valid a portion of a data report as tables with numbers. So I think we'll be able to get there.
Thanks, Melissa. Thanks, Barb. Any questions for Barb, Melissa, or me, or Emily, our data subcommittee? Other thoughts on the data worksheet, or anything it's missing, or new ideas for it? As you can see, we've identified some of you that we think might be able to at least help us think about specific categories of data. We may have missed we may have missed people in any of those. We welcome anyone raising their hand saying, I want to also help with any of those categories.
So not knowing what this is Takura, not knowing what the nature of the help that's needed is,
You're raising your
help.
hand.
Right. So I'm happy to help, but again, I however I can, in any relevant way, I'll help.
So, sounds like another member of the subcommittee, Emily.
I'll include Takura on the next meeting invite.
Takura, we welcome that. I do think, I get it that you're in private practice, so you don't have, court data at your fingertips, but you might have ideas that we don't about where we could look and the kinds of things we could look for. So I think your perspective would be quite helpful. So, yeah.
Yeah, happy to join.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on the data worksheet, or ideas, things we're missing, things we should be adding to it?
Justice McCormick, can you guys hear me?
We can. Thank you, Judge Fuca. We know Judge Fuca is in her car on the phone. Thank you for joining.
Yeah, you're welcome. We looked at the data, trying to access the data that you guys were looking for. And our biggest problem is that JIS just there's nowhere to record that stuff on JIS.
Yeah.
So we don't, if, from my standpoint, JIS needs to be so that we can keep track of some of the stuff. And a lot of it too, we have no starting point. Like, it's hard to compare when we have no before. We're now doing just after the implementation, of that stuff that we did in April. So without like a starting point, it's very hard to get the accurate data. And then we were talking too, it's very difficult to have a control group primarily because of COVID, and just the fact that that's everything across the board.
Yeah, we are well aware of the JIS deficiencies, but we're trying to brainstorm with Laura Hutzel and Tom Boyd about what, if anything, we can do about that. But yes, we are well aware of those deficiencies. We definitely are in need of a statewide case management system so we could collect really good data and make it transparent.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. And I did gather some data up from my sheriff about who's incarcerated in terms of probation versus people who are like serving time on something else.
Mm-hmm.
So she did have numbers for me, but I didn't think to get the numbers again from, I would think we would need pre-COVID numbers and then try to compare that number to the number we have. That way we can tell if in fact, there's been a change. So I would have to get back with her to get back with you guys on that.
That would be great, Judge. I do think there may be some before and after data from individual jails that might be able to tell us something. That is one of the
Right, and
places where, yeah, hopeful.
Macomb County is such a big county. I think we're a pretty good cross section. So I could get that for you and I'll forward it onto the committee.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Justice McCormick, I was just looking at the worksheet and I can lend my support in the expungement area. I was looking at all the lists. I think that that's probably where I could probably be best served.
That's great. Thank you, Rep. Yancey. That would be wonderful. Yeah. All right, Barb, anything else we want from this group today? I mean, we're gonna keep working on all this, obviously.
Yeah, I would, just say, obviously, to keep looking at that. If you have ideas, you can send them to, Emily, or I think will probably be the best person. And even anecdotal stories to Kara, I think that's where your expertise is going to be in, because you're in the courtrooms and you see these things, and you can, even though you don't, as Justice McCormick said, you don't have the data at your fingertips, you're like, this is what I'm seeing. And I think that is going to be really helpful to us as well.
Oh, yes. And actually, yesterday I met with a new client and was talking about the new reforms, because this is someone who, started having close encounters of the fourth kind with our local law enforcement long before these changes. So yes. So absolutely, I have plenty of those. Happy to share.
Great. Well, the future meeting dates are in the agenda. As usual, I'm not going to take up any more of your time than we have material for. Emily, am I missing anything we needed to do this morning?
I don't believe so, Chief Justice. I think we're probably all set.
Okay, please stay in touch with us in between meetings. Again, if you have any ideas, even like Barb said, anecdotal ideas that might help us think about something we could look for in our imperfect systems. Thanks, everyone. Good to see all of your faces. Have a nice day.